On March 25th, 2026, the first trailer for the new Harry Potter series was released by HBO. Within hours, headlines like this appeared online. On March 10th, actor Hugh Jackman, known best for portraying Wolverine in the X-Men film adaptations, performed for none other than Rupert Murdoch, media mogul and arguably one of the most controversial mega capitalists in the world, as well as Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner, and a host of other MAGA and conservative elites. His longstanding ties to an alleged cult, the School of Philosophy and Economic Science, resurfaced. Known as SES, they have a confirmed history of child abuse, which has affected generations of children and even figures like actor Emily Watson and author Clara Solomon. This past February, Neil Gaiman, author of the Sandman series, American Gods, Anansi Boys, and so much more, as well as his estranged wife, Amanda Palmer, were sued former nanny Scarlett Pavlovich of trafficking. Gaiman first faced allegations of assault from eventually a woman in 2024. J.K. Rowling, Hugh Jackman, Neil Gaiman, these are all figures whose art and presence in the celebrity landscape has shaped generations. They all have one word in common: beloved. Beloved actor, author. They are only 3 names on an ever-growing list of artists whose art, or interpretation of an established art, built worlds, inspired generations, and made people really feel something. And then they let us all down. How can figures like these, people who are often branded as loving, progressive, kind, empathetic, turn around and show themselves to fail against the standards set by their own creations? Can we separate the art from the artist? When they invariably make new art, do we engage? Do we put aside the cruelty of the artist because the art moves us? But first, are you a fan of deep dives into the ins and outs of what makes our world tick? Then you're in the right place. From storytelling, pop culture, current events, politics, science, or history, I throw a little bit of everything into the mix. I love to explore all of the contextual threads that make our world ours. All resources will be listed in my source notes in the description. Today's video does briefly mention discussions of harm to children and transphobia, although it doesn't mention specifics. So if today is not the day, that's okay. You can always jump in for my next video. If that sounds like your jam, then don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's have a respectful conversation about a nuanced topic. It's the only way to make sure you don't miss a single thing, and you get to support a small creator like me. While I will be touching on the issues with the artists I mentioned, I won't be doing an intense deep dive into those issues. Instead, I want to discuss what we, the people
of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union and establish justice,
who have laughed, cried, and learned from the art made by these artists, can think about when it comes to engaging with that art. First, J.K. Rowling. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, the Sorcerer's Stone in the US, was published in 1997 in the UK and 1998 in the US. 5 more books, one split into 2 parts, followed. Ultimately translated into 85 languages, it's the most successful children's series of all time. Multiple movies, spin-off series, video games, merch, a stage play, Universal attractions, and more were produced to ensure the sales kept rising. And it's expanded into one of the most recognizable franchises in history. The mark the Harry Potter books, movies, and associated content has made on the world is impossible to overstate. Like millions of others, Harry Potter was a foundational part of my childhood. To this day, one of my happiest and most peaceful childhood memories, probably what cemented my intense love of reading, fantasy, and diving into other worlds through books, was my mom reading Harry Potter to my entire family. We were all rapt, listening to her act out all the different voices as Harry, Hermione, and Ron challenged cruelty, evil, and fear, especially when it would have been easier to look the other way. It set a precedent for what words on a page could inspire. I was introduced to the movies at a very young age and fell deep into the world those movies made real. Well, real to elementary aged me. We weren't the kind of family to buy merch, but we did have the hardcover books, and we had physical copies of the movies. My friends and I used to obsessively sort each other into Hogwarts houses and tease each other about what our Patronuses would be. I always wanted a tiger. I was told I was a horse, maybe. So when J.K. Rowling, the profoundly beloved author of a series known for challenging societally entrenched phobias linked to identity, started liking transphobic tweets in 2018, then snowballed from liking to tweeting to publishing a novel where the villain was a male serial unaliver who wore a woman's clothes, the world collectively watched the carefully curated image they all had of her shatter. Soon, she was supporting legislation that harmed the trans community and compared attempts at accountability from trans creator Jessie Earl to book burning. She also founded Barria's Place, an SA crisis center that excludes trans women, using money she made from the Harry Potter franchise. Then she was named in a cyberbullying lawsuit along the likes of Elon Musk of Olympic athlete Imai Khalif after Rowling tweeted a photo of Khalif accusing her of being a man who was enjoying the distress of a woman she didn't use the right pronouns, just punched in the head. Last year, she established the Women's Fund, which offers support for sex-based rights in the workplaces, public life, public spaces, and is entirely funded by her billion-dollar net worth, due in no small part to the earnings from the Harry Potter franchise, and is heavily criticized for financing anti-trans advocacy. Actors from the Harry Potter films who have spoken out in support of the trans community have received backlash from Rowling and her supporters, and actors who have chosen to continue working with her have been lambasted for ignoring the very real harm involving themselves in a project that supports her financially can have. And you know what sucks? When I saw the trailer for the new HBO series that dropped recently, even with an entirely new cast, music, and set design, I could still feel baby me. The one who found so much solace in the books as a child. I had memorized entire chapters, getting emotional. But am I gonna watch it? Absolutely not. I don't have to be trans myself to recognize supporting anyone who is transphobic is wrong. None of us have to be part of the community that's being harmed to recognize the harm is wrong. The bar for being hateful and supporting hate is so low, yet somehow a lot of people still manage to concuss themselves on it and fall into an abyss of self-important obsession, where every attempt to pull them out is seen as an existential threat to their life. Even beloved children's book author J.K. Rowling. So what do I do with the emotion? I don't read the books now or ever think to rewatch the movies, but that was a pretty big part of my childhood. Is Harry Potter in my baby pictures? Thankfully not. That'd be weird. Is Harry Potter in the room with us now? No. But I do know that the lessons I learned from that series had an impact. The series spawned an intergenerational fandom community full of fanfics, theories, and opportunities for connection for people all over the world. A sizable chunk of that community is queer. And you know what that means? That series was important for trans kids, teens, and adults the world over. For some, the messages and themes of the books and the movies helped them come to terms with their identity and have the courage to love themselves and live openly. So why would I buy games or merch or watch the new series when I know that puts money in the pocket of a person dedicated to harming her own fans? That still leaves the question of the emotion, the nostalgia. Plenty of reactions online have already glossed over Rowling's transphobia in favor of their own personal connection to the franchise. But transphobia isn't going away. Rowling has shown that she's only getting more involved in moving legislation in a more transphobic direction. Maybe watching the new series is out? If I want some nostalgia, maybe I'll watch X-Men instead. There aren't any wands or spells, but I really like Wolverine's character, and the messages and themes of the franchise are really, really good at allowing for nuance, and Hugh Jackman is so perfect for that role. I don't think anyone else will ever be able to do it justice. I know he's really talented and has done all kinds of roles that center on challenging oppression, entrenched in international systems of power. Oh, all right, Hugh Jackman. Hugh Jackman rose to global prominence with his role as Wolverine in the 2000s film adaptation of the X-Men comics, X-Men. Although he's been active since 1994 in both the theater and film world. To date, he's received a Grammy, an Emmy, 2 Tony Awards, been nominated for an Oscar and a British Academy Award, and he was awarded the Companion of the Order of Australia in 2019. Some notable film credits include The Greatest Showman, The Prestige, Les Miserables, Deadpool and Wolverine, and my personal favorite, Van Helsing. What? I know it's a terrible movie, but the costumes! Vampire brides. Come on! The character of Wolverine gained new popularity due to Jackman's portrayal and went from a gruff, rough, and tumble hardliner for doing the right thing, regardless of convention, to a sex symbol. Wolverine has been building in the public consciousness since first appearing in Marvel's 1974 comic, The Incredible Hulk, issue 180. As a figure fighting prejudice, racism, cruelty, and oppressive systems across the galaxy as a lauded member of the X-Men. Jackman's nuanced interpretation of Wolverine also made the character accessible to legions of new fans through the movies, and he replayed the character for multiple iterations from 2000 to 2024. That's 24 years. There are many who grew up with the films who associate Wolverine with Jackman's portrayal and Jackman with Wolverine's morals. Hugh Jackman and his PR team absolutely know that. Many of his roles center on being the good guy. I can't actually think of a role where he plays a total villain. Not that he hasn't ever played complex characters like P.T. Barnum in The Greatest Showman, but his personal image and reputation as an actor has been so strongly associated with being the hero who didn't want to be the hero but couldn't stop himself because it was the right thing to do, or the pull himself up by the bootstraps, well-intentioned good guy. That the concept of him playing a truly evil character is hard to imagine. So how could he play multiple numbers from The Greatest Showman for Rupert Murdoch? A man almost single-handedly responsible for turning 20th Century Fox from an artistic launch pad to a machine that spews racist, homophobic, transphobic, and misogynistic propaganda. How has he been friends with Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner for 15 years? How is he able to not talk about politics with a couple famous for their active involvement with an administration that supports the genocide in Gaza and sends thousands of people to detention and deportation camps? And they're in the Epstein files multiple times. How has he been an active member of a group that has been considered a cult and been fully responsible for intense child abuse? He sent his own children to schools run by the cult that had schools shut down for their abuse of children. Cult in question, the School of Philosophical and Economic Science, often referred to as SES, started in London in 1938 by a bunch of econ nerds who wanted to find a way to use economics to make the world better. It devolved into an international philosophical organization with schools and branches in the UK, Australia, and the US. It used concepts of Vedic teachings to host classes about finding happiness.
Why is it always the rich white guys who like to use Eastern philosophy for their own ends?
Somewhere along the line, that turned into dogmatic social restrictions that required intense obedience, chastity, and a removal of emotional ties, even between parents and children, in favor of SES authority figures, or risk profound abuse. Young girls could be removed from parents at will and sent abroad to marry men much older than them without their consent. They were children and were to devote themselves to their husbands and home without question. British boarding schools run by SES were found to have committed multiple acts of harm against children, and one was even shut down due to the extent of that abuse. Brainwashing and indoctrination were built in, and as acclaimed actress Emily Watson found out, expulsion could arise just from attempting to have bodily autonomy. She grew up in SES and was expelled for doing a nude scene in a film at the age of 29. Whoa. Wolverine would never. Wolverine would shred Hugh Jackman to bits. But he's a philanthropist. He did the Global Poverty Live Below campaign. That was a campaign to raise awareness about the difficulty of living below the poverty line. So Jackman lived for 5 days with only $1.25 for food daily. He also works to raise awareness about AIDS and support children's hospitals. We know he's an all-around good guy. He's a humanitarian. He's Wolverine. He fights the bad guys, right? But how do we know that? Okay, never mind. No, never mind. Maybe I need to go back to something with more magic. Maybe something more adult, though. With maybe more adult-centered than Harry Potter, at least. Stories that explore adult themes and issues and failures that aren't anchored in my mind by one particular actor, like Hugh Jackman and X-Men or his other movies. The Sandman series has been one of my absolute favorites since being introduced to it a few years ago. The author writes complex narratives about people of all genders, has had healthy representation of queer characters long before it was more socially acceptable to do so, highlights people of color without relying on racist stereotypes, and even explores the way women are used by men to fulfill their own ego-driven desires. Let's talk about Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman has been a monumental figure in the journalism, screenwriting, literature, and comic scenes since the 1980s. His first published work was actually a biography of Duran Duran in 1984, but he moved on to comics and became a central figure to the comic book world by 1988. He's written for DC Comics, Vertigo, Dark Horse, Marvel, and co-founded Image Comics in 1992 with Todd McFarlane. To list the sheer amount of works he's been involved in or written himself since then would take a lot more time than you or I have. Suffice to say, if you are watching this video, there is a pretty high likelihood that you've read or watched something he was involved with. Best known for the Sandman series, American Gods, Good Omens with Terry Pratchett, Stardust, Coraline, The Graveyard Book, and Anansi Boys, several of his publications have been adapted into TV series or films. The most recent release was the Sandman series on Netflix, which to this day is one of my favorite TV series of all time, especially the first season. He also tours, reading excerpts from his novels or poetry. I've been to one of his readings, his poetry readings. I was a new fan in a massive auditorium full of people who had been reading his work for years and absolutely had stronger connections to his work and his persona as an artist. Some had tattoos inspired by his characters. Others had used his words to mark momentous occasions in their lives: proposals, marriage vows, funerals, births. But I fell under the spell as soon as he opened his mouth. He's a world weaver with words, with self-deprecating humor at just the right time, and with just enough wit to feel personable and engaging. And he's funny in the kind of way that doesn't feel rehearsed or forced. He's like one of those people you read about whose eyes twinkle good naturally. The distance from stage to seat felt non-existent. Not in a creepy way, not in an idealizing way. In the way a really good conversation feels when you're falling into friendship with someone new and the rest of the world seems to be quiet because you're learning, feeling seen, and realizing you align in the ways that, as Marie Kondo says, spark joy. The experience felt meaningful. After he finished speaking, as an audience member, it felt like there was a united we. Whereas before, we'd been strangers, jostling each other, trying to get to our seats and not step on toes. It felt warm, happy, like something good had happened and been shared. The Leftist Cooks have an incredible video where they go in depth about Neil Gaiman and their relation to his work and how to navigate the fallout after the allegations. And I highly encourage you watch after this. That video will be linked below. So when it came to light in 2024 that he had been allegedly assaulting women he had control over as their employer or landlord since the 1980s, the blow was massive. Of all the artists in the world, him, the characters in his work, the storylines he creates, all actively call out men who abuse power, who use coercion. His most famous character, Morpheus, wrestles with and is tormented by the way his own privilege and selfishness causes the destruction of the only person he has ever truly loved. And his willful imprisonment of her for rejecting him is meant to make you realize how power begets cruelty, even when the reader is supposed to sympathize with Morpheus as the complex good guy. One of my favorite storylines from The Sandman is about one of the Greek muses being trapped by a modern-day author to attain divine inspiration through essay that earn him success, and how he lies to himself and to her that he will release her once his next book is written. Only he can never bring himself to. The lure is too great, the power too captivating. It's an absolute condemnation of self-centered patriarchal male ego. It also calls out the systems that keep her trapped and protect the man for the sake of art. How could someone who wrote that, who understood that well enough to write that story well, be the bad guy? How could he be the one who hurts others the same way? He seemed like one of the good guys, the few good guys. He's been active since the 1980s, and before 2024, there hadn't been any well-known allegations to speak of. He seemed safe to support, to identify oneself as a fan of. Someone being a fan of Neil Gaiman's work seemed like a safe litmus test to see if you might have values and world views in common. It was also very easy to forget he's a media mogul. He's involved with almost every major comic publisher and has access to a lot of money and power. He's used that money and power to essay women, especially women in vulnerable situations. And then he tried to use social pressure, NDAs, and money to silence them. And it worked for years. Friendly reminder, NDAs are not valid if you're supposed to protect or not speak about a criminal issue. Food for thought. The suit brought against him and Amanda Palmer by Scarlett Pavlovich was dismissed by the American judge in the court it was filed, but not because the case was heard, tried, and Gaiman and Palmer were acquitted. It was simply dismissed because the judge ruled that the case needed to be filed in a different court. It's not an acquittal. Gaiman has not been proved innocent. All crimes against him are still considered alleged because they haven't been tried, but the statute of limitations, the crimes being committed in multiple countries, the pressure of NDAs, and the money Gaiman pressured the victims into taking, sometimes without their express consent, creates a barrier to trial that can't be invalidated. Of course, it would be convenient for his fans if the allegations were a scheme to drag his name through the mud, so we could look forward to whatever new work he produces and not feel any twinge of guilt when we're rereading or rewatching his current body of work. But it is incredibly rare for what is convenient to be what is truly right. Multiple women who have little to no relation to one another aside from their connection to one famous individual rarely decide to secretly convene to besmirch the famous individual just for kicks. Extorting money from a famous person, as Gaiman alleges, is what's happening, doesn't work as well either if the blackmail material is out in the open on a podcast. So where do we go from here? The art to artist to audience relationship. When we come across art that speaks to us, it can feel like the creator of that art has reached inside our minds, maybe even our souls, and saw something that not even those around us could see. Or it feels like the art is the exact reflection of the morals and value systems we want to see reflected or modeled in the world that we might not be seeing in our day-to-day lives. The protagonist might suffer in the ways we understand suffering and triumph in the ways we wished we could or have. A well-done story told through all the mediums art encompasses, be that music, fashion, literature, film, sculpture, theater, dance, painting, or now content creation, can form a bond between the art and the audience that feels unshakable. The kind of art one gravitates towards can be the building blocks of identity. The fandoms that art inspires can become true community that transcends traditional social or financial barriers and provide connection that would feel impossible otherwise. The art that inspired the fandom can in turn inspire more art. Or it can inspire important educational trends. J.K. Rowling has been credited numerous times with reigniting an interest in reading in the generation that grew up with her books. Storytellers of all mediums have been reflecting and refracting the world we all live in since recorded history began. So it makes sense that we assume the artist who makes the art that moves us holds the same value as the art they've created. It would seem incongruous for Trump, for example, to make a nuanced, loving, and thought-provoking story about POC trans immigrants calling upon ancestral knowledge to fight the forces of evil. So when creators who are able to create stories that speak truth to oppressive systems turn around and become or show themselves to have always been a hammer, exact system they opposed, the result is whiplash. This is the point where we have to talk a little bit about the concept of parasocial bonds. A parasocial bond is an often used term to describe the relationship between the artist and the audience who supports them. Officially, according to the Cambridge Dictionary, parasocial bonds are involving or relating to a connection that someone feels between themselves and a famous person they do not know, a character in a book, film, TV series, or artificial intelligence. This word has been used a lot more recently, largely because of the idea of access that a general audience has to the artist that takes their interest or inspires their interest. The concept of an artist-to-audience relationship being parasocial is also more recent as, again, the access we have to artists has changed due to social media. And artists can weaponize that access to create an unrealistic sense of there being a deep relationship between themselves and their audience, or vice versa. The audience can create an unhealthy sense of connection to an artist because of how social media makes it easier to feel personally invested in the lives of an artist. Pre-internet, the daily interaction or exposure most people had to their favorite artists was significantly less. Primarily, fans connected to artists through their work, either in published form, recorded form, or through curated experiences like meet and greets, signings, or performances. There wasn't a constantly updated source of information on artists' whereabouts, projects, or goings on in the same way we have today. Interviews published in magazines, journals, or on TV shows showed up the most before a new release, and primarily to discuss the new release versus to give a peek into the daily life of the artist. As a result, whoever the artist actually was wasn't known widely by the audience that supported them. Mythologizing artists was easy because they weren't as accessible. Whatever fantasy the audience wanted to paint onto them could be painted with less opportunity for that fantasy to be disrupted by the artist themselves. Not having phones able to record and transmit transgressions or even awkward behavior can do a lot to keep someone dreamy, who might not actually be, or just be embarrassingly human. At the same time, a lot less ability to track the interest of the audience and respond. With the constant measuring of metrics due to social media, artists can maintain a much higher awareness of what the public actually likes about them or doesn't. Pre-internet, there also used to be an air of mystery to many artists, and the social norm for many artists was to let the art speak for itself. Once upon a time, with traditional journalism or media, anyone with enough money could avoid publication of negative press or shift the spin of articles that might paint them in a negative light. There was a separation between audience and artist mediated by the concept of an institution, like a journalist for a newspaper or a host for a TV program. Mana of the Visual Kei band, Malice Miser, and Moi Dis Moi was famous for refusing to speak directly in interviews, opting instead to whisper to bandmates whenever asked questions. The art functioned as a curtain to keep the artist shielded from view. Interviews and in-person meet and greets and running across an artist in public used to be one of the few ways that the audience could peek behind the curtain of the art to see the artist. So the artist generally knew to present themselves in a certain way in those spaces. Now, if an artist wants a chance to become successful, they need to have a social media presence that requires a sense of accessibility. They need to post regularly, do live streams every once in a while. There needs to be a sense that anyone who follows them can, to some degree, interact with them. Comments left on posts might be liked by the artist, regardless commenter is famous or not. Fans can communicate with artists directly and ask questions in live streams. Yes, there are teams behind those posts, but as an audience member, there is a sense that the veil that's used to separate us as the audience from the artist has lifted somewhat. That also means the separation between the audience and artist has allowed us to hold artists accountable in ways that were more difficult to achieve when the flow of information was centralized to specific strongholds, like legacy media outlets. Simply put, there are a lot more accounts for an artist to keep track of, or their team to keep information hidden, than there used to be. Access to decades of information hosted online also means we, as the audience, have an easier time tracking down corroborating evidence or cross-referencing. Or for anyone who may have been victimized by popular artists, to have a platform or space to share their story where they'll actually be heard. That is also harder for the artist to control who has access to, which makes it harder for the artist to stop stories or reports like that from being heard or being globalized, as in the case of Neil Gaiman. What social media has done is shift the way many of us feel when it comes to our sense of personal relationship with the artists we admire. The concept of a parasocial bond has taken on a new meaning in the age of social media, as our sense of proximity to our favorite artists has changed dramatically. Now we have streamers, YouTubers, content creators, people you can carry in your pocket and interact with directly during your breaks at work or when you're scrolling in bed. Anyone who considers themselves a fan of that streamer or content creator has access to them through comments, live streams, DMs, community messaging servers. There's a lot of positive opportunity with that level of access to develop a sincere community. But content creators can be rewarded or severely punished when the boundaries between content creator and audience goes too far. There's a sense that for those creators, it's harder to hide one's flaws. The internet will find out quickly and spread it globally if the creator does something wrong or that the audience doesn't approve of. There are YouTube channels dedicated entirely to discussing creator missteps or serious allegations. So there isn't an easy way to circumnavigate the social narrative about oneself as an artist in those spaces. Our sense of who an artist is, especially as social media has changed our sense of access to artists who used to feel untouchable and unreal, has changed. But this leads to another component of the art to artist to audience relationship that we need to talk about. Branding. Personal branding is significantly more accepted in the general conscience, largely due to social media, than it used to be. Now, with the possibility of anyone being able to build a following online, every person has some kind of presentation they show online that doesn't necessarily show every gritty detail of their real life. A lot of the time, when the word branding comes up in conversations like the ones we're having now, it's seen as negative, as if a social figure is lying to others to ensure that they'll be liked or that they'll come across in a likable way. But we all do this, and we're not lying. We're just highlighting the parts of our lives that we feel comfortable showing to others. Instead of doing that at dinner parties, family functions, or when meeting new people, we do it online. We're allowed to have boundaries about what we share with others, but branding does go a lot farther than that. It creates a template for the artist to maintain an image, even with the heightened accessibility provided by social media to support the ideal the audience may have built for them, built by the art they've created. Hugh Jackman is a great example. He cultivated a particular persona that helped garner him the kinds of roles that increased his fame and then ensured that the roles he was best known for were worked into his personal branding strategy. That's not to say that he doesn't actually share personal beliefs or characteristics that earned him those roles. I'm sure he did, but he also knew what to highlight about himself in the public conscience that would continue to help his career. Even his involvement with SES, which he was open about in an interview with Oprah in 2006, was carefully discussed as a method for ensuring he had a healthy relationship with his family as a father while navigating the stresses of Hollywood and the demanding physical and mental expectations that playing Wolverine required. His involvement with SES was also only briefly highlighted. Any acknowledgement or mention of SES's problematic past were not mentioned. His generally liberal personal branding, which he largely earned from playing Wolverine and having Wolverine's morals transferred to him in the public conscience, also means that he isn't the artist most people would pick to be besties with Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner. So when it turns out that he's deeply comfortable supporting figures who directly harm the audience who supports him, we get whiplash. You may have noticed there's only one actor in the list of who I discussed today. That's not wholly an accident. When actors turn out to be completely unlike the characters they portray, we're not as surprised, largely due to the fact that to some degree, we as the audience recognize that an actor is not supposed to be playing themselves to a T in their performances. They're supposed to be someone else. We celebrate the talent it takes to take on another person's characteristics or identity. Not to say we don't get into Twitter debates about an actor's politics when they release a eugenics-coded jeans ad after gaining fame for appearing in shows like The Handmaid's Tale and Euphoria. Shows that directly examine the way broken systems and ingrained social mores cause suffering for everyone involved. That sense of whiplash isn't as strong, except with actors like Hugh Jackman, whose entire branding strategy and the roles he takes on are based on the social support for the morals of the characters he's famous for. The same can't be said of authors. As an audience, we generally assume that an author is aligned with the views discernible in their work. Otherwise, how would they write or create with those perspectives in mind? Until social media, authors also weren't as likely to have the same kind of celebrity on a gossip magazine at your local grocery store status as a popular actor. There's a whole conversation about class distinction in relation to artistic medium we could get into. Let me know if you're interested in the comments below. But authors often had an air of academic or intellectual weight behind them, due in no small part to the assumption that having the kind of large or varied vocabulary successful authors utilize meant you probably had to have a higher education. Also, a lot of, not all of them, but a lot of them, the authors that normalized the medium on a large scale and are celebrated today as representatives of canon literature were highly educated, aristocrats, or wealthy enough to afford pursuing a literary career. So, in general, the curtain of the art is more connected to who we assume an author to be. That's why it was so monumentally cruel to find out Neil Gaiman and J.K. Rowling, as people, were so drastically different from the art they made. We couldn't feel that we just assumed they held certain beliefs because of the characters they played in a film. They wrote characters who would identify them as the enemy. And now, so must we. So, what should we do? Princess Weeks has an incredible video breaking down this exact concept in relation to Harry Potter, explained from the perspective of someone who was significantly involved in the fandom. Princess Weeks is also just someone you should watch because her videos are amazing. I'll link her video below. To start, if you're struggling because an artist you love has proved themselves to be an act and your neck muscles are spasming from the whiplash of that reveal, I have an option. The answer is easier than you might think and free. Let me introduce you to this incredible public service called the library. Before we get into how useful this magical place is, let's get the hard part out of the way. Separating the art from the artist isn't truly possible for living artists. When an artist is still alive and still profiting from their work and then using that profit to turn around and harm already oppressed communities like J.K. Rowling, every cent you spend goes directly towards that harm. Neil Gaiman resurfaced after going quiet for almost a year to push back against his criminal allegations. Yes, they are criminal allegations. For some reason, I feel like those words haven't shown up as much in the reporting about his alleged crimes. Test the waters to see if he could announce a new work, but it wouldn't make much sense for him to resurface and highlight his continued supporters, specifically one supporter's attempts to discredit his alleged victims, if he wasn't hoping to see if he could maintain his status and continue producing new work. But unless he ends up convicted, he will need to continue producing new art to continue his career. Anything he produces going forward finance his ability to fund his legal team or affect his alleged victims. I'm only repeating the word alleged because he hasn't yet been found guilty in a court of law. As a result, there is no way in good conscience to support that harm. No matter how much nostalgia you have, how profound their future work might be for you, but that doesn't mean that you need to start burning books or taking every bit of merch you have and crushing it in a car compactor, mafia style. Instead, don't purchase merch, don't buy new copies of their work, don't play the new video game, don't go watch their movies or new releases, don't go to their Universal theme park attractions. This goes far beyond J.K. Rowling, Hugh Jackman, or Neil Gaiman. I'm looking at you, Joss Whedon. But you might be asking, where do I go? How do I engage with the art now that my view of the artist is forever tainted? This is where the library comes into play. If you want to read Harry Potter, the Sandman comics, or watch a Hugh Jackman film, rent it from a library or a video rental store. Those do still exist and are one of the few spaces keeping affordable physical media alive. Instead of contributing to the cruelty of the artist who has harmed many or profits from the harms of others, support a public service that is in sore need of that support. Fandoms that we've created around the art are no less valid than they were before we knew what the artists we united around were capable of. Use your voice online to hold those artists accountable and make sure they don't get to hide from the consequences of their actions. emotions. The messages in the art we loved are still important, but those artists are not the only ones capable of creating worlds that can inspire you, move you, or bring you to tears. Bad people may be able to create beautiful things and become beloved artists. But there are just as many incredible artists who make the kind of art you need to move on. When artists fail, the morals of their own art don't continue to fund their failure. Thank you so much for dropping in for another video. If you liked my content or you're curious about other topics I may have covered, you can find them all on my channel, and I also live stream. So I am going to be live again Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. PST. And I'll have different topics for more informal conversations every stream. If you have a topic in mind you'd like to discuss, please let me know in the comments below or jump into my Discord, which is linked in the description as well. If you liked what I had to say, I appreciate it immensely. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. But if there was anything in this video you felt like I didn't quite cover or I need a broader perspective about, please let me know in the comments. I always appreciate learning and love to take the opportunity to expand my own knowledge by communicating with you all. Thank you again so much, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!